everyone, I'm Abigail, this is Josh, and welcome to another Two Kids interview. Today, we are joined by New York Times bestselling author Jewell Parker Rhodes. Miss Rhodes has written many books, including the Louisiana Girls trilogy, Black Brother, Will's Race for Home, Towers Falling, and of course her New York Times bestselling book, Ghost Boys, which is coming out as a graphic novel at the end of 2025. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Some of my favorite books are coming out as graphic novels this year. The Lemonade War by Jacqueline Davies, One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia, and Refugee by Alan Grass. And your book, Ghost Boys. I love it. Are you excited about the graphic novel? And how did the process work of adapting Ghost Boys?
Oh, I'm very excited. And I'm also excited because you told me about titles that I haven't didn't know were coming out in a graphic novel. So I love One Crazy Summer. I love Refugee, so that's really thrilling. We actually started the idea of doing a graphic novel during the pandemic. And it's been a really long, long road. Sitor, who is our illustrator, he's actually lives in Africa. And so we had distance problems, but we also had just the whole chronic condition of the pandemic, making it hard to collaborate. One of the things that they did decide to do is that most of the writing in the graphic novel is actually lifted straight from my book. As you probably know, I write, really concrete, sort of like short sentences. And so it fit in perfectly as dialogue. But the biggest hurdle we had in doing the graphic novel, besides just taking a long, long time, was how to depict the ghost. How to make the ghost boys not seem like, Casper the Friendly Ghost, or not seem menacing, but also to seem like the spirits of an Emmett Till, the spirits of, Jerome himself. And we had several different people who made audition drawings, and Cedars was by far the best. I also learned a lot about how color can emphasize drama and make things more dramatic. And I'm super, super excited. I think it's going to be a great thing. Now, how about graphic novels? I think clearly there's a great demand for it. A lot of kids love it. And when I was growing up, we used to call graphic novels comic books. So that's what I started reading, the illustrated classics, King Arthur, Prince Valiant, The Prince and the Pauper. So I read comic books. So I see graphic novels as an important art form. But one of the things about working with an illustrator is that it became collaborative. If you read my novel Ghost Boys, it is an experience. And the great thing about having an illustrator who is just as dedicated to making the book great as you are, the original writer, with their artistry, it becomes something even newer, something even grander, and it's another piece of art. I just am flabbergasted at how the talent of the visual actually enhances the talent that I had with my words. So I'm excited.
You write about some tough topics. Is there extra pressure when writing about racism or 9/11 to make sure you get it just right?
Oh, Josh, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. Lots of pressure. And in fact, it started with Towers Falling. My editor said, Joel, why don't you write about 9/11 for all the kids who weren't alive and didn't participate in that moment in history? And I said, no way, no how. Everybody in my family said, no, 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 mama, don't do it. And then one day I was on a plane, and all of a sudden it popped into my head that I could do it if I said it in a school. And it was part of a teaching curriculum. And I also thought I've been writing all my life, hoping for the day that I could be a writer for young people, that was always my goal. And it took me 30 years to achieve my goal. So I really also felt that if I don't try it after all this practicing, then it's sort of like, what good was I, So yeah, it's going to be hard. And yeah, I might not do a good job. And if it's not a good job, we won't publish it. But I thought, I deserve to try to do the hard topics because my young audience, they deserve to have a chance to know about it and think about it. And then we found, of course, a school in New York City that was right across from the towers. And so those students saw everything that happened. And that school and the teachers opened up their hearts to me. And I started to get a real sense of how that affected them and how I could maybe put it into a novel. I also wanted to show that after 9/11, because we have video, kids can see on video our towers being victimized, our country being victimized. And the thing that I remember most is the triumph of how, as Americans, we all came together. You really felt such strong patriotism. And so I wanted kids to remember that no matter what has happened in our history as a country, when push comes to shove, when there's a war, when there's a financial crisis, when there's 9/11, that the thing that holds us together as a nation is our community as Americans and our American values. But yeah, it's hard writing about things. But with Towers Falling and also with Ghost Boys and Black Brother, which deal with race, I had a deal that if the book didn't come out right, we wouldn't publish it. So one of the things is that if you see a book of mine published, it's because I wasn't just writing it to get a paycheck. I was writing it to leave a legacy and to give my best to young people. And yes, I would rather give the money back, not have it published, than put something out in the world that didn't deserve the greatness, the best that all young people deserve.
How do you learn about the characters that you write?
Oh my gosh, another great question. Um, Sometimes I'll get an idea, like I'll like say I know I wanted to write about Hurricane Katrina. And Ninth Ward was my first youth book that started my career as an author for young people. And I actually went to bed and I had a dream because another hurricane was coming to Louisiana, and I was worried, that oh my gosh, how can they stand it? And when I woke up, Venetia's voice was inside my head. And I literally grabbed a piece of paper, and the first two pages of that book just came out of me straight from a dream. So her voice, they say, I was born with a caul, a skin netting covering my face like a glove. That just happened. And that is my pattern, that I cannot write a story until the character's voice comes to me. It's almost like dramatic acting or dramatic fiction writing, that once I hear the voice, then I can sort of dig in deep on the character and start to write the story. So for Will, my husband and I were at a cafe, and I've been thinking about Will's Race for Home and the Land Rush, and it was like, months of just thinking and dreaming and just uh, uh, having images flit through my mind, and then boom, my father is a far-thinking man. And I said, that's the first line of my novel. And my husband said, yep, I think that's pretty good. And then I was off. I could all of a sudden write Will. So I might know like big events that'll happen, like they have to do the land rush, they have to survive Hurricane Katrina, they have to save a community from an oil spill, they have to survive a wildfire. But I don't know what choices the character's going to make until I hear the character's voice. And moment to moment, I think, what would they feel like? What would they do? How would they react? How would they think about something? So that's why it takes me a long time to sort of write the novel, because I don't plot it up. That once I have the voice, I let the voice and the character guide me. It's very strange, very strange.
Did you ever hear a character's voice and then you were like, I don't really like you. You're not getting a book.
That is really, really, really a great question. Um, there's been times when I've struggled as long as 6 months trying to get a voice, particularly when I was trying to write, from a boy's point of view or a man's point of view. But generally speaking, every voice that I've started with, I've stuck with. And I think it's because by the time I get to that point, I've got all the passion. Even done some research and I'm really interested in the topic, like 9/11, and Deja's voice. And so it works. There are, though, tons of other stories that are in my heart and mind that aren't ready to be born. And I think it's more likely that for me, after a while, if I don't hear the voice, then it means it's really not my passion project and I'm not meant to do it. And then, of course, because I have tons of ideas, I just go on to another idea. But by the time I get a voice, then it's sort of like I'm hooked.
When doing a school visit, what is the most meaningful interaction you've had with a kid?
Uh, well, I gotta tell you, I do really, really love when I get permission to get a hug. And in fact, I love middle schoolers. And I think that if I die and come back as a spirit, if I'm reborn, I want to be a fifth grade teacher. But anyway, so I like the personal interaction. And I also like how you can't put anything that's not authentic past a kid. I like how they're frank, how they're like, truthful, or how they'll criticize and how they'll also say, I really appreciated this. So that honesty of emotion and that honesty of thought is so cherished. And I think more than anything else, I think my books are trying to remind kids that they have power and to keep their honesty of thought and emotions, because very often you'll find in my novels, it's really the child who basically teaches the adults how to behave or act or think appropriately, that there's fairness and wisdom in use. And I think we ought to listen to youth more often. And one of the things that I try to do is to encourage youth not to forget who they were, say in middle school, so that when they become 18, 19, 20, 21, remember how forthright and honest they were then. So I think it's like absolutely terrific that give and take between me and students. So I'll be able to say to students, if you guys grow up and you don't vote, I'm going to come back and haunt you, and they'll laugh. But they know that say that's coming out of my book that we need to be active in our society. We need to vote. Or I'll say, well, is it fair to just judge somebody based on the color of their skin? And they'll go, no. And then I'll say, well, remember that. Don't forget that. Because sometimes, say, adults will get scared. And so they'll start scapegoating people and judging people because sometimes it's really, really hard to be an adult. But I think if we keep more the inner child with us, remember who we were when we were young people, that it'll give us the strength not to scapegoat, not out of fear to blame somebody else for, the world's problems. So I just love school visits. And to tell you the honest truth, if I didn't see students like you guys, which I'll remember you guys for the rest of my life, I think I would like have my heart broken, literally, especially during dark times, times of trial, knowing that your generation is doing things that you're doing, podcasts, art, picking up stories, playing instruments, thinking about hard problems. That is what gives me hope as a writer and for the future.
Of all of your books, which one do you connect with the most?
Oh, oh my goodness. It's kind of like you say my children, I connect to all of them. They all have a special place in my heart for just some different reasons. Ninth Ward was my first youth book. And I remember thinking, hallelujah, better late than never. That I was finally starting to write the books that I wanted to write. But one book that meant an awful lot to me was Treasure Island. And Treasure Island Runaway Gold is not one of my big bestsellers, but that's the book that I wrote during the pandemic. And it was based on the pirate stories, but it was also set in New York City. And the pirates ran around, skated around on skateboards. They set sail on skateboards. And they also found out about the history of Wall Street, where it once was a slave market for slaves. And that's how Wall Street got its name, that there literally was a wall. And there's actually a burial ground still there. But what I loved was we have Zane, who's an African American boy, Kiko, who's into martial arts. Oh, and I love martial arts and kendo. She's Asian, an Asian American. And then we had Jack, who's this young white kid who's kind of like strong, who like doesn't like anybody to bully his friends, you know? And so he's always so loyal and standing up. And the three of them discover treasure, they discover loyalty, they discover adventure, and they outwit the pirates. And then they have a little dog named Hip Hop, a Jack Russell Terrier. And I remember finding out when I was doing my research that there's actually contests for how many rats a terrier can kill in a minute. Can you believe that? It's true. And so Jack always asks Hip Hop the terrier, Hip Hop, have you killed any rats today? And Hip Hop, of course, no, he's a dog. But when they go into the city and have to go in the underground, abandoned subway parts of New York City, hip hop comes to save the day. So for me, it was a joyful, joyful adventure filled with friendship, love, action, adventure based on Treasure Island, written by one of my childhood storyteller, you know, persons that I love very much, Robert Louis Stevenson. So I think that has a special place in my heart. If I wasn't writing that book, I don't think I would have survived spiritually the pandemic. Ghost Boys, I never could have written during the pandemic. 9/11, towers falling, I never could have written by the pandemic. But I could write about heroes and bravery and walking the plank and just this wild action story and feel the uplift of young people and happiness.
Those boys is temporarily banned in Florida and other places. How did that make you feel? And can you talk about your thoughts on book bans?
I think book bans are wrong. I really do. I think having access to books is for everyone. That's not to say, that your parents don't have a place in terms of saying, well, why don't we wait until you're old enough to read this book? Like I wouldn't recommend Ghost Boys for a second grader, but if you match the age appropriate with the book, you should trust the writer to be able to expand the educational value, the empathy value, the learning about different cultures, different perspectives. All of that is important to be part of, the world that we live in. And it connects to me in a very profound way. When I was a little girl growing up, I did not know that there were people who were non-white who wrote books. Literally. I was never given a book by a person of color or a person besides of another country besides, say, England or Scotland or Ireland, ever. And I went to school from kindergarten to 12th grade. And then I went to college for a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctor of arts. So for the longest time, I actually thought that I could never be a writer, that there were no role models, that Black people wrote books. And I remember one day I was a junior in college and I happened to go in the library and I saw this book on the fiction shelf written by a Black woman. And it was like, women write books. And it was like all of a sudden, what I was meant to do, just came to me. And I switched my major to English and I started writing. And even when I started writing, I was in class. My classmates who are all white would say, well, why didn't you tell me your characters are Black? And I'd say, well, why don't you tell me your characters are white? And that was when I learned that for my generation, all the characters were by default white. All the writers that I read were by default white. And so I think I am blessed that I found my calling because I could see it and then make it real. So in a way, I feel like with Ghost Boys being banned, they're like going back to the world that I grew up in, where there might be, tons of kids, not just Black, but white, Asian, Native, etc., who won't know these other histories and won't know that their stories, their cultural histories matter too. Are we really going to go back to a generation where kids of color don't think that their lives are worth having stories about? So to go in my lifetime from becoming a young adult, discovering for the first time that I could be a writer and my stories might matter to the world, to, oh no, kids aren't allowed to read your books now. It's like whiplash. It really profoundly hurts. It's really awful, especially since with Ghost Boys, I use it as a way for people to explore how if you're racist or just have racial bias, that the effects and tragedy of that can still be the same. But there is a big difference. If you have racial bias, it's because there are parts of our culture that have contributed to that. And young people in particular can't help undo that. In fact, there are adults living today that have undone just a lot of the stereotypes. People who fought for civil rights, religious freedom, say for everyone, including Muslims, that where there are ways in which we've made great progress, and we still need to make great progress. But you can't make progress if young people don't know that there are still problems, that there are things that are still happening today, that we need them to grow up and become empathetic and loving and active in stopping certain kinds of ills in our society, to make the world better for everybody else. So I've never yet met a kid that when you say, is this fair? Generally, kids are really good at figuring out what's fair. And if you say to a kid, is bullying right? Generally, except maybe for the bullies, but generally kids will go, no. Is someone better than someone else simply because instead of having, fair skin, they have brown skin, which actually comes from genetics and how, people who were born who went north became lighter skin to get vitamin D. People who went, to the southern climes got darker skin to protect them from the sun. That skin color is just like whether you're short or tall, blonde-eyed, blue-eyed. It's just a superficial thing. It has nothing to do with human DNA in terms of the core, what makes us human beings. So if you ask kids about that, they'll say, no, that's not fair. And so my books reinforce um, that approach to the world. And I hope kids will grow up and remember, oh, I read about this in Towers Falling, that even if you're under a terrorist attack or if you're in a war, it's very important then to stay true to your values, not just become vengeful and spiteful and fearful of other people. Or if somebody's being treated unfairly because of the color of your skin, that you can speak up or you can become a lawyer and work on law. So it gets all complicated, but it affects, I think, everything. My ultimate goal is for all human beings to get along with one another and to recognize that all human beings, like Will's Race for Home, want the same thing: happiness, joy, comfort, food, and a home and family.
We agree.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have any story you wanted to tell for a long time, but haven't figured out how to do it yet?
Yes, I have. And because maybe I haven't figured out all of that, the voice hasn't come to me. One of the things is when I was a little girl, I liked the idea of swords. I used to watch the Three Musketeers and all those things. And I go, oh, swords. I just love anything having to do with swords. And actually, my husband is Norwegian descendant. So he's into swords. And I think I fell in love with him too because he was also doing Japanese swords things. So I love that idea. And I remember I was 28 years old when I discovered that Alexander Dumas, the guy who wrote The Three Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask, that he was actually a black man. His dad was known as the Black Count and was Haitian and French. And he was also Napoleon's general. And he was considered to be one of the greatest swordsmen and soldiers of all time. And all of a sudden, it was like, How come I didn't know that a fencer in those days could have been a person of color? If I had known that the Three Musketeers might have included a young black kid, I might have started fencing. So why did we have a culture making all those characters white? So anyway, that bit of information finally got into Black Brother, because I talk about fencing there and the black kids fence. But I want to take it one step further. Want to write about the Vikings. The Vikings had swords, but especially the elite guards of the Vikings, they had swords that were as good as any swords that you can find in the 21st century, centuries apart. No technology. How could they possibly have swords that were so like perfect? And actually, there's this guy who's in Iowa who's a swordsmith and actually using the basic tools of, fire and a kiln that Viking might have had. He was able to prove that you actually could refine a sword hundreds of years ago to be as good as a sword today. So I wanted to write about how the Vikings went out with their swordscraft and sort of like, traveled and conquered other societies in a bad way, in a way, in trade. But there's a hero, a young boy who works as an alchemist apprentice, and he actually has the ore and knows how to refine the ore to make it this special sword. And so they try to kidnap him so they can conquer. And this young group of kids, including a girl who can fight with the swords, they basically somehow or another help restore peace or understanding between the fighting warriors and the community they're trying to overtake. So I went to Norway, Copenhagen, Turkey, Istanbul, um, uh, Iceland, doing research for this story. And it's not quite ready. So it's been 10 years, but I would love to write a big adventure about Vikings and the magic that a young swordsmith knows and how he leads them to kind of make a peace with the people that they normally would conquer.
If I
Would
hear
you
it,
read that story?
oh yeah.
Yeah, yes. Okay. Well, let me tell you, if I ever get to writing it, and I hope I will, okay, I'm going to dedicate it to you too. Okay. So it's
Yeah.
sort of like, because you guys are the first ones who ever asked me about this question. You're so great at your interviews. So yeah, that if that book comes into the world and I'll start thinking about it again, it's going to be in honor of you too.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure.
A lot of authors know each other. What is your craziest or funniest experience with another author?
Mm. Oh my goodness. In a way, being out in the Pacific Northwest, I don't get to see other authors as much. But I think one experience that I had with Grace Lynn, we were up in the Northeast, and Grace Lynn is a fabulous writer. But one of the things that she's able to do is not only write stories, but draw stories. And I watched her school visit presentation, and it was all about telling a story, having the kids help her. And that was really, really fun to me. The other one that I really enjoyed was Dan Santat, his new book about growing up and having his first love. It's a graphic novel. Dan is hilarious, and he's not afraid to poke fun at himself or the fact that he was a nerd growing up and how he was very, very shy. And he just makes me laugh. So he's kind of like that kid who everybody likes, who actually enjoys being a comedian, and yet he's able to be a comedian in honor of making the world, making kids who feel outsiders actually feel more insider, that they're okay. So Dan Satat and Grace Lynn, who actually creatively got kids to help her make a story while at the same time she was showing the illustrations. So maybe that's not funny, but that those times meant a lot to me.
We actually interviewed Graceland.
She's cool. Yes. I like her a lot. And do you ever like wish you had a skill that you don't have? Like Grace, like I can't draw a straight line. I just literally can't. So I admire people who can draw just like, wow, it's like magic, you know? So the fact that Dan, I will see both of them I picked, Dan and Grace, can do both. So I'm just all of people who can do both. Wish I could do it. And Jerry Craft, he can do both, you know, but I can do the words, but I can't draw. But you'll notice a lot of my books will have illustrations because I always think that they add to the book, you know, maybe from based on when I used to read comic books, but they always get somebody else to illustrate them. So they know not, don't ask me. It'll be ugly, ugly, ugly.
Can you tell us exactly where you were and your reaction when you found out you were a New York Times best-selling author?
Okay. Well, right now I'm living in Seattle, Washington. And actually, I live in a place called Discovery Park. It's like maybe 15 minutes from downtown, but it literally is a park, 534 acres. And a long time ago, it used to be a fort, Fort Lawton, and they used to have barracks, and they would have this great field out front where soldiers would march. They have a chapel, and then they had a row of houses called Officers Row, and a house called the General's House. I live in Officers Row. It's a four-story house. It's painted yellow. They're all painted yellow, but the porch is literally looking out at the park. And from the park, I can see the Puget Sound. And from there, I can see the mountains. I can hear birds all the time. It's a perfect place to write. And then on the weekends, people come up with their dogs and they play and have picnics. And so literally, I'm close to the city, but I'm in nature, which gives me the perfect sustenance for writing. It's we've only lived here since November, and there's raccoons and coyotes, all kinds of crazy creatures, and I can hear the otters down by the Puget Sound, making their noise, oink, 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 But when I found out I was a New York Times bestseller, it was shock, unbelievable. I hopped up and down. It was like I told everybody I could think of, oh, look, oh, look, oh, look. And I was just really, really thrilled. But I can tell you one thing that also made me feel that way too. Do you guys ever watch Jeopardy, the show Jeopardy? Where they have the quiz show and then they'll have the question, what is California, right?
Yeah, we know
Ghost
one.
Boys,
Yeah.
yes, Ghost Boys was a Jeopardy question. And then I had people from all over saying, Jewel, the clue, based on Emmett Till and the Ghost Boys come back for racial justice, and somebody answered, "What is Ghost Boys?" And so when people started calling me and said, "Jewel, a Jeopardy question," so New York Times bestseller and the Jeopardy question both had me over the moon.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Mm. I would have to say, as an adult writer, the person that was important to me was Toni Morrison because I started reading her on my own and I could recognize that she was writing from the oral rhythmic tradition of the African American community. So that is what I try to do with my young books for reader. So I know how to write a standard English sentence perfectly. I can write a dissertation, but sometimes I'll write so that you get the sense of like, a grandmother on the porch telling you a story that has this sort of oral cadence, rhythmic cadence that comes from people like my grandmother who used to tell me stories. So that influenced my style of writing. The writing children's book that I loved the most was The People Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton. And it was a book of African American folk tales. And on the cover, it has these Black people turning into birds flying. And it's based on a story about, people who were taken from Africa as slaves. And then they were working in America and they forgot their names. They were forgetting their traditions. And then there was an old elder, who said to them, particularly one day when this particular mother was suffering, carrying her child while she was picking cotton, he says to her, "Child, go where you know where to go." And then he whispers her African name. And literally, she starts rising into the air and turns into birds, a bird that's going to fly home to Africa. And all the slaves who remember their true name turn back into birds to fly home to Africa. And that song, that story reminds me a lot. And I wonder whether the Beatles knew about when they wrote the song Blackbird by the Beatles, or just the image of how birds set you free and how birds have this great wisdom. In Paradise on Fire, I talk a lot about eagles and eagles seeing how a wildfire is born. But I got to tell you something that's really interesting. I connected with a friend that I went to college with. And apparently, when I was maybe 19, I wrote him a thank you note. And in this thank you note, which he kept and he sent to me last year, I wrote to him, I wish I could be a bird. I could feel so free and so happy. And on the little piece of stationery, there was a bird. So fast forward to now, I'm in my, I'm 70, right? But 2 years ago, I was at a retreat and they said, well, what can you do to de-stress yourself? What makes you feel calm? And I said, bird sounds. And so I got me a little thing to make bird sounds in the house. So the idea that somehow or another, since I was a little girl or a young woman, birds meant magic to me. And that probably explains why I liked Virginia Hamilton's The People Could Fly and the slaves turned into birds. And Toni Morrison also has a story called The Song of Solomon, which at the very end, the protagonist and antagonist both start flying across this great chasm of mountains. And you don't know whether you're going to make it or not. But given the African American history, I think Toni Morrison wants us to think that they could fly, that they could make that magic. And I think all my life, I've probably been in a way trying to fly. And the closest thing that has gotten me to that is writing for youth. I fly when I have a new book for young people like you.
What are you writing right now?
Getting ready to start, and I'm waiting for the voice, but I always wanted to write a story about animals. So my stories always have a dog or a cat. Will's Race for Home has a horse, Midnight, who's so brave, and has the Bell Mule, who's so loyal. So I'm going to have a dog, but I'm also going to have a robot dog. So I'm writing a story, and there's several different directions I can go that I think I want to show that sometimes human beings, even human beings who make robots, maybe even robots, think that they're right about everything. And I think there's a way in which dogs can teach us all how to be happy, that dogs live in the moment. They're incredibly fierce and loyal when they have to be. And so basically, fundamentally, it's in praise of how we can learn to be better, more humble in the world because of the grace, and the special power of animals. So it's maybe a nature loving book. I've had lots of dogs in my life, Jack Russells, Black Labradors, and now we've got a corgi. And actually, in that closet right behind me, I have all the ashes of all the dogs. Oh, and the cats, three cats, and a hamster. And I'm waiting to make a garden of remembrance for these animals so they can put them all together and I can sit near their graves because I remember them. They're so special to me. I still dream about them. So fundamentally, I'm getting ready to write a book about artificial intelligence, human intelligence, and the glorious, wondrous intelligence and emotional intelligence of a dog.
I would definitely read that. Me too.
Oh my goodness, thank you, thank you. Okay, well, you guys are gonna have to check in on me to see if I get it right, and I'm gonna make sure I send you signed copies. But yeah, well, here's a question for you: should the dog be a boy or a girl?
Hmm.
I've
What do
been
you think,
thinking.
Josh? I actually don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can see advantages for both. And then here's another question for you: should it be a rescue, Should it be like a German Shepherd, or right now I was thinking of like a Malamute um sheepdog mix, like a rescue mix of a dog, one that's going to be like big and smart, but I don't know. So it's like trying to figure those things out. I need some guidance. You guys,
Rescue.
what do you think?
Yeah.
A rescue? A rescue? Okay. All right. Well, definitely go with a rescue. My daughter just got a rescue, and it's part sheepdog and pit bull. And it's really, really interesting. But I think one of the things is that pit bulls, I know that they can be just as sweet as they can be, but so many people are afraid of them being, hard. And I think what happens with animals, perhaps, maybe not all, because I'm not an expert, but I'm reading a lot of books about dogs and dogs' intelligence. But I kind of think I want a dog that you don't think would be like a police dog, maybe, that they wouldn't have that aggression, except for when maybe their babies are threatened or when their friends are threatened, that they wouldn't necessarily just be an aggressive dog, or they would be an aggressive dog who could be trained to be an aggressive dog because they were protecting the person who trained him, but I wanted to stay away from any breed that was just known for aggression. Because I think that there are times maybe where it's okay to be aggressive to protect what you love, like a mama, have you ever seen a dog when they've given birth to puppies? They or a cat, they can be, don't you touch my babies. Or sometimes I love when you see the pictures of YouTubes of dogs who then, oh, I'm going to take care of this cat and I'm going to be its mom. Don't you touch my baby. That it's like, I like those things. So I want to show, yeah, we'll see. All right. But definitely Abigail and Josh are rescue. Okay. Maybe I'll send you an email later and tell you what dog I picked. Or if you have any ideas, let me know. Okay. My husband just says it can't be a corgi because the legs are too short.
Finally, it's time for our Turbo 10. 10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
Number one, what is your favorite phrase to use?
No worries.
Number two, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
I think ancient history. I would love to know more about the ancient history, the Greco-Roman, African, just all ancient history. I get the National Geographic magazines and they just blow my mind all the time. So ancient, ancient, ancient history.
Number three, what is your go-to snack food?
It used to be potato chips, but I'm trying to be healthier. So it's popcorn.
Number four, what was your favorite book growing up?
Well, the people could fly, but I must say that I really love Prince Valiant, the comic version, Prince Valiant. And I remember one day eating donuts, and my husband and I were in the car, and he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And by then I was 27, so I was kind of grown up. And I says, "I want to be valiant." I immediately flipped back to Prince Valiant. He was noble, he was kind, he was charitable, he was brave. So all those things, I want to be valiant. Prince Valiant, the comic book.
Number five, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Tahiti. I've always wanted to go to Tahiti. So I would go to Tahiti, especially since it's so great here in Seattle.
Number six, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, fly, fly like Superman. And in fact, there's a line in Ghost Boys where when Jerome is shot, he turns thinking he could fly like Superman, but he can't fly. But yeah, flying.
Number seven, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Oh, um, I'm blanking out of the name. He had a stuffed tiger, and he was a really bad boy. Um, oh, help me, help me. Uh, oh, I
Calvin
can't
and
think.
All.
Yes, Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes. Thank you very much, Calvin and Hobbes. We used to have a whole collection of Calvin and Hobbes books of the comic books. Calvin and Hobbes.
Number eight, What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Oh, my favorite rainy day activity is actually lighting candles and having a fire and drinking something warm like hot cocoa with marshmallows.
Oh, that's yummy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Number nine. If you could have any three dinner guests, who would they be?
If I could have any three what?
Dinner guests.
Dinner guests. Oh my gosh. Oh, interesting. Um, well, I think I actually would like to have Robert Louis Stevenson. He was very famous for his son. He brought psychology into his writing, and I really would like to have him. Another dinner guest, I think I would like to have, oh, Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare, and I want to know more about Shakespeare. And then the other one would be Toni Morrison. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah,
Number
we'd have a
10.
great dinner.
Wait, number 10. What is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
All right. Can I just go back though to number nine for 1 minute? How could I
Okay.
forget Gary Paulson, who wrote Hatchet? I love his books. Gary Paulson's Hatchet. Okay. All right. What was the best advice I was ever given? Okay. I would have to say, um, be good to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Love yourself. And I think sometimes when I get super stressed or super worried about something, I forget that. And sometimes when I think I have to be perfect, I forget that. So I think fundamentally self-love, self-care, self-kindness. If you feel good in here, then it makes it so much easier to give good out into the world and to receive good from the world. So be kind to yourself, everybody. Give yourself cut some slack, right? Cut yourself some slack.
You were awesome. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you so much. I think the two of you are awesome. You definitely have a career. And if you ever start a business, having to do with marketing and publicity and children's radio, children's storytelling or whatever, oh, please contact me and I will contact all my friends. You've asked some of the most wondrous questions. You've been so professional and it's just been a joy. I feel as though I'm right there, like maybe in your living room or something, or at your dining room table, and I feel so at ease. Boy, I wish I could hug you in person. Thank you for the honor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Um, we will definitely read your future books.
And
Bye.
any
Bye.
book you want, just tell me. I'll send them to you, okay? All right,
Okay.
bye. I'll
Bye.
see you. Bye.
Bye.